Thanks, Paul. Paul was out go-kart riding. He almost got kicked out of the go-kart place last night, right? Just keeping it real. He got blue flag, which means if you're one step away from getting kicked out of the go-kart. Yeah, so I'm a worship pastor. You can't kick me out. Awesome song. Thank you. It's a great song to reflect on. Come as you are, lay down your burdens. I wish I had that song in my playlist last night as I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep. Saturday nights are the toughest for me. Yeah. So how many of you saw the sunrise this morning? No pressure, because only one guy in first hour saw it. So did anybody see the sunrise this morning? Hey, we got like 4, 6 people. Cool. It was beautiful. I was driving down the freeway and just this explosion of colors over and around Mount Rainier and the yet to be snowed upon Cascades, and it was spectacular, this explosion of color. And so this is when I cease to remember that I'm driving, and I'm just watching the colors, and I started to reflect, and I think about what I'm thankful for, and I think about my family, and I thought about, excuse me, some time I had with my daughter Sophie yesterday, who's our youngest, who's 7, and we were talking about some of the stuff I have to deal with and do because of the bike crash I had in October. And she, about 2 minutes into this discussion, she was very adamant, "Dad, stop talking about the crash." And I realized that she didn't want to talk about me being hurt or me being vulnerable or something worse than what happening to me. And as I'm driving along, trying to remember, make sure I get off at the right exit, I just said, "God, I'm really thankful for my family because I love them very much." She's over there with her ears plugged. She's like, "Don't talk about me." That's right. I love you, man, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because I got the mic, sweetie. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble later. So we're starting and there you go. There's your useless information from me, and that was more deep and reflective. But I got a lot of undeep and fun stuff that you'll talk about in your small groups this week, I'm sure. Which is cool because a lot of the small groups are going through this series with us over the next 7 weeks, which is going to be a lot of fun. We'll be on the journey together, and I'm not going to speak all 7 weeks on this series. There's going to be 3 of us, which will be good for each one of us who takes our turn at these 7 signs, and it'll be good for you to hear from different voices and have the opportunity to have some different kind of conversations around your small group. So there are 35 recorded miracles of Jesus in the New Testament, and the Apostle John, the apostle who is known as the one whom Jesus loved. And it wasn't somebody else writing that about John, it was John writing that about himself. If John knew anything to be true about his life, he knew that he was the one whom Jesus loved. It wasn't that Jesus didn't love anybody else, he did. But what John knew to be true about himself is that he was the one whom Jesus loved. He had an intimate relationship with Jesus. And in his gospel, this one whom Jesus loved records only 7 of the miracles out of the 35. Only 7 make it into John's gospel. And John refers to each miracle as signs. And so it's deeply significant that John refers to these miracles as signs because he doesn't want his readers to see Jesus' miracles as simply being historical events that happened in the past. He doesn't want them to see them as amazing occurrences that only impacted those who were physically touched by the miracles or who were firsthand witnesses to these miracles. John wrote about each of these 7 miracles to reveal what Jesus did, to be sure, but he also wrote about each one of these 7 miracles to point to the deeper spiritual reality in each one of them and what Jesus offers each one of us today, 2,000 plus years later, in the deeper truth of each one of these signs. So if we're honest, and you don't have to raise your hand on this one. You raise your hand if you saw the sunset, but not on pretty much anything else. If we're honest, each one of us at some point has asked God for a sign, right? God, if you show me this, I'll know I should do that. God, I know I won't do this if you show me this. And I don't know what your percentage is on signs. I'm like, there are a couple zeros at the beginning of my percentage of God coming through on the signs I'm looking for. But when I was 12, and I'll go back to when I was 12 because I think it's relevant all these years later. It's phenomenal that I can remember things that happened when I was 12. So when I was 12, I was at a camp in northern Wisconsin, in the north woods of Wisconsin called Silver Birch Ranch. And what happened every summer was that they busted a bunch of kids from the city of Chicago up to this camp in the North Woods with horses and a lake, and we didn't have anything to do but talk about Jesus, so that's what we did. And one particular summer, I was working there for the entire summer, and one day, a friend of mine and I were working in the stables, and we're shoveling manure, serving God, or whatever it takes. And his name was Jason Alexander, not the one from Seinfeld, but the one from Mount Prospect, Illinois, Chicago kid. And we're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if God showed us a sign? I'm like, yeah, it'd be really cool. What should we ask him for? And so we're thinking about that. And as we're thinking, these dark clouds are all around us, right? And so we took a risk, and we said, let's ask God to make it rain. So we said, God, please, if you're real, if you love us, if you want us to serve you, God, make it rain. And it rained. And we're like high-fiving each other, I'm like, it's raining, They forecasted rain for a week, No. It was because of our prayer. Then we're like not satisfied. It wasn't enough that it rained. Let's ask God to make it hail. So God, if you love us, if that was awesome that it rained. But if you really love us, if you really want us to serve you, God, then make it hail. And it hailed for like 4 seconds. According to us, it did. According to us, and we're like, yes, we're high-fiving each other, God. You did that, and so now I think that was either my calling to ministry or completely ridiculous. I'm not sure. Either way, there are times in our lives when we look for signs. We ask God to show himself in real and tangible ways in our lives. People are always looking for signs, and the fact that we're always looking for signs reveals just the deeper desperation in our souls to be connected to the one we were created to know. It's that part of us that believes that we're meant to belong to something bigger than ourselves. It's Ecclesiastes 3:11. He, meaning God, has planted eternity in the human hearts. We know that there's more. Instinctively, innately, we know that there's more than what we're experiencing. We're hardwired to be in relationship with Jesus. And if that relationship doesn't exist in our lives or exist for us, then our soul is left with that God-sized emptiness we talk about so often, and that ache for Jesus. And that ache is for Jesus whether we recognize it or not. He's the only one who can soothe the ache in our soul and fill the emptiness. And if we ever question whether God is real, we need only see the sunrise on a February morning over Mount Rainier, right? If that doesn't do it for us, then we need only look within ourselves and feel the ache, which we can only dull and we can only keep at bay for a short time before it comes back in full force. We need only look inside and feel the longing for more than this life offers us that just lingers and lingers and lingers within us. There's some, when it comes to signs, we're going to have a little fun here. There are some interesting items which many people believe are signs from God. And these things have popped up in different places in the world in recent years, and many call them signs. Let's see what you think. First, there's Mother Teresa on a sweet roll. You remember this one? So the person who baked this says that, hey, I didn't make the sweet roll in the shape of Mother Teresa. It came out this way, and it must be worshipped. And so they worshiped the nun on a bun. And you guys didn't catch that. John caught it. First service is like on top of that one. Are you like that tied to Mother Teresa that I can't say that's a nun on a bun? Wow, you guys surprised me. Then there's the image of Mary. You see it? That's an insurance office in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so what happened here is that people set up crosses and chairs and lit candles, and there were flowers, and they had worship services all around this image of Mary, so-called image of Mary, on the glass of an insurance company. And then the third thing, which is getting more and more recognition, more and more discussion, I think is maybe more interesting, is the Shroud of Turin. People so desperately want this to be the shroud that covered Jesus when he was in the tomb. So I'm not sure if these are signs. I had a couple others. I decided to drop them because they were too weird, comical, and some of them were a bit spooky. But I think the nun on the bun is certainly hilarious. But people have made shrines out of these things that they call signs. You know, they would go to that insurance company in Florida and worship a glass that looked like Mary until somebody shot it with bullets, and it no longer looked. It only looked like half a Mary, and then they stopped going. True story. The fact that we embrace and worship these signs is evidence, again, I think, of the condition of the human soul apart from a relationship with Jesus. We are desperate for something to be real. And it seems to me that the more ridiculous the sign is, the more it reveals the desperation of the human soul to find something that's real, to find something that matters, to find something that connects us to that eternity we know innately we belong to. To connect to the God we innately know we belong to. The truth is that signs aren't enough anyway. If we only look for signs, then we run the risk of missing what our souls really need, what they're actually looking for, what they're truly desperate for. By focusing on the 7 signs that Jesus, John does for us what Mother Teresa on a sweet roll can never do. He reveals Jesus to us. He reveals the one who pursues us with relentless tenderness and gives our lives purpose and satisfies the deepest needs and deepest longings of our soul. There are 7 signs for a reason. There are 7 signs because the number 7 represents 2 significant things. It represents completion and it represents perfection in the Bible and in Jewish culture and in other ways. At the end of his career, before he got busted for doping, Lance Armstrong had won 6 Tour de France races, and it left him lacking. Left him wanting more. So he went back and he won his 7th. And after he won his 7th, he said, now I feel like I'm complete. Then he had to come back and prove he wasn't doping, and it got all messy. But that 7th one was completion for him. And so these 7 signs in the book of John reveal a complete and perfect picture of what Jesus has to offer each one of us in the room. It's almost as if John is saying in these signs, if you're going to know and embrace anything about Jesus, embrace the deep truths in each of these 7 signs. Because in them, we find all that we need to be a fully loved child of God and a fully committed and true follower of Jesus. There's a little background on the book of John. John wrote this book around 100 AD, so it's roughly 70 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And at that time, the movement of Jesus was gaining momentum, and John is writing to a Gentile audience who would have been significantly influenced by a Greek culture, and they wouldn't yet have a grasp on the significance of who Jesus was, what he did, what he was all about, how he felt about them, all those things. And as a result, John leaves certain things out of his gospel. You find him talking about the word in the beginning of his gospel, but there's no genealogy there. There are no parables in John's gospel. He doesn't spend time on the birth of Jesus. So John's purpose in writing his gospel isn't simply to record the events of Jesus' life. His purpose is to record the most significant events in Jesus' life so that those who read it, those who hear it, could know and follow Jesus, that they had all the information they needed, just enough information so that they could know and follow Jesus. The key verses in this series, the key verses in the book of John are John 20, 30, and 31. It says this, Jesus' disciples saw him do many other miraculous signs besides the ones recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life. So John gave us these 7 signs, focused on these 7 signs so that those who read them and heard about them would have life. In fact, John says in his gospel that you would have life and have it to its very fullest. And that's my prayer. That's my hope as we go through this series, that we'll come out of the other side embracing life with Jesus in a fuller, deeper way, and experiencing life in a fuller, deeper way, experiencing life to its fullest. So we've been trained, air quotes on trained, we've been trained both as Americans and as Christians in America that bigger is always better. If you're from Texas, you know this to be true. Make the biggest splash that you can. Get the biggest bang for your buck. Always achieve the best, the highest possible goals that you can achieve. Make the most money. In the church world, bigger is always better. Bigger churches are always better. Bigger church events or bigger ministry events always have a lasting impact than smaller ones. Yet we find Jesus working his first miracle at a relatively insignificant wedding in the town of Cana, which speaks volumes about Jesus. It speaks volumes about the value he places on people, real people like you and me. It's where he goes. It's who he hangs out with. It's where he spends his time. John 2, starting in verse 1, says, Jesus' mother was a guest at a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. And Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. We're going to talk about whether or not they were all invited here. But Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother spoke to him about the problem. They have no more wine, she told them. How does that concern you and me? Jesus asked. My time has not yet come. But I love this. Just like a great mother, a great Jewish mother, she ignores him. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you. 6 stone water pots were standing there. They were used for Jewish ceremonial purposes and held 20 to 30 gallons each. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. When the jars had, so that's 120, if you're doing your math at home, 180 possible gallons of water. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. And when the jars had been filled to the brim, he said, dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So they followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. Usually a host serves the best wine first, he said. Then when everyone is full, and full I think is a euphemism for another word, then when everyone is full and doesn't care, he brings out the less expensive wines. But you have kept the best until now. This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was Jesus' first display of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So here Jesus is at a village wedding feast in Cana. In Luke 15, we've looked at that several times over the last couple of months. Jesus is right off the bat in verses 1 and 2 of that chapter. Jesus is accused of associating with the wrong kind of people, despicable people, people of the land, people who are unworthy, tax collectors, prostitutes, every type of notorious sinner. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders believed that Jesus was nothing more than a pagan. In fact, there were several times where they called Jesus out as being part of Satan's deal, part of Satan's group. They thought he was from Satan himself because he hung out in places where these guys wouldn't be caught dead hanging out. Jesus hung out with people and did things at these places where he hung out that these guys, the Pharisees and religious leaders, would never do and never be caught dead doing because it would cost them their status if they were. So we can learn something from, actually I want to ask the question first, would we hang out with the kind of people Jesus hung out with? Do we hang out with the kind of people Jesus would hang out with if he were in our lives, in our world, and in our time? So we can learn something from Jesus here, whose sole purpose, by the way, was to create a pathway to God for all people. Not just for the notorious sinners, but for the religious as well, for the Pharisees. If they would have accepted who he was, all that he had and all that he offered was for them too. But Jesus especially pursued the regular people, the people who had been cast out, the notorious sinners. He knew that his greatest impact would not come in the synagogues, but among the real people on their turf who needed him the most. We get so nervous sometimes as Christians about what kind of message it sends for Christians to be in certain places, doing certain things around certain people. If you don't know, it's kind of code. If you don't know what I'm talking about, keep it that way. Keep it that way because it'll save you a lot of grief. If you do know what I'm talking about, then you understand the grief. Kara and I spend a majority of our relational time with a group of close friends that we love dearly. I talk about them all the time. They love it, just like Sophie does. And when I was a younger Christian, I would have felt religiously uncomfortable hanging out with our friends, these people who don't go to church, who don't live a life anything like anybody who goes to church lives, at least not on the surface that we show everybody. I would have felt religiously uncomfortable hanging out with them the way that we do now. And the way that we hang out with them now is on their turf. Not where we're most comfortable, but where they're most comfortable. And we don't even think about it anymore. The reality is it's not what we do here on Sunday that matters most in eternity. It's loving people that feel like outcast for whatever reason, good, bad, valid, invalid, whatever. And that we love them on their turf. That's what matters in eternity. Not so much what we do here. Hopefully what we do here spurs us on to meet people on their turf and do something that matters for eternity. So the wedding feast is a big deal in first century Israel. The wedding, ready for this, mothers of the bride? The wedding is a 7-day event. That's not fun for at least 2 people, I can tell you. The mother of the bride and the groom. I'll tell you why. So instead of a honeymoon that they couldn't afford, the bride and groom are treated and addressed as king and queen. They're paraded through the streets of their town, and they have this great feast that they host for who knows how many friends and family. It's a big deal. That's a long time, man, in close proximity to a lot of people that you don't want to be around when you just got married. I'd be like, hey, don't feel like you need to stay the whole 7 days, you know. Thanks so much for coming. God bless you as you leave. You know, that would be my attitude as the groom. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, she appears to have a special role at this feast. There's no doubt that she has a close relationship with the bride and groom, but her concern for the wine reveals that she may have been responsible for the refreshments at this 7-day event. So when the wine runs out, she feels compelled to do something about it, and to do something about it quickly. And she quickly realizes that her only option, her best option, is to turn to her son, who happens to be Jesus. It's a great option to have. She goes to Jesus for a couple of reasons. First of all, by this time, Joseph had died, and so Mary does what any good Jewish mother would do, any mother really, in her place. She turns to her son. And Mary and Jesus have a special bond, which got stronger, it would seem, after the death of Joseph. And Jesus took responsibility for Mary and the rest of his family. Whatever you think of the movie, The Passion of the Christ, some of the greatest scenes without words are the scenes that reveal the bond between Jesus and his mother Mary. So I'm going to say this because I said it first hour, and you can talk about it at your small group. It's been suggested that Mary turns by conservative biblical scholars, okay? I wouldn't bring it up unless it had. It's been suggested that Mary turns to Jesus because he bears some responsibility for the wine running out as quickly as it did. What? I can feel it. You go, what, Todd? Are you saying Jesus drank all the wine? No. This wedding takes place just as Jesus' ministry is getting off the ground. He's been out prior to his arrival recruiting disciples, getting people to follow him. And verse 2 says, again, Jesus and his disciples were invited, but some of these biblical scholars are suggesting that Jesus was invited, and the extra people he brought with them were wedding crashers. So you know what wedding crashers do. They eat the food and they drink the stuff before its planned expiration, right? They eat it, and the 7 day, can you imagine how it's hard enough planning a wedding that lasts, a few hours. Imagine planning one that lasts for 7 days and trying to figure out how much food and drink to get for everybody. And then you have extra people. You've got potential wedding crashers eating. It messed things up. So whatever the reason, Mary turns to Jesus. So on this whole wine thing, we've got to talk about the wine thing. I live in Woodinville. And Woodinville has become like wine country, air quotes, wine country, if you've ever been to California, where there is virtually a winery or some version of a winery on every corner in one part of town. In fact, in one part of town, there's more than one in every corner, like one every 100 feet. You can actually take a bus tour and go visit all the different wineries and forget where you've been by the end of the day, if you so choose. So the Safeway at the bottom of our street, at the bottom of our hill in Woodinville, employs a sommelier, right? There's a guy in there just to be an expert on wine for the Woodinville connoisseur of wine who wants to come in and know what the best wine to get. His name is Scott. I don't know him very well. But last night we were talking, and I was looking for corn nuts. And because I know Scott because he's really close to some of my friends who need his help, whatever, he showed us where the corn nuts were, and he showed us pictures of his kids. He's showing my kids pictures, and they're like, Dad, why is this guy showing pictures? Because he knows our friends. I don't know him. I know his name's Scott, so believe that or don't, whatever. But having said all that about Scott, I don't feel like I need to be the defender of wine in this story, but there is a question that we have to deal with, and that question is this. Did Jesus drink wine? And was the wine that he drank real wine as we know today? And probably not real wine as we know it today, because it wouldn't have been engineered the way it is today. But was it real wine? So a couple things before I answer that question. I went to the University of Northwestern, a fairly conservative college in Minneapolis. It's one of the many colleges that Billy Graham himself was the president of at one time. And in that school, there were some professors who were ultra-conservative, and they were from a generation that believed that Christians who drank were committing sin. And so, as a result, these professors went to great lengths to teach and to prove that the wine in Jesus' time was barely wine, if it was wine at all. It was essentially grape juice, according to them. But if we look at the Bible itself, what the Bible itself, this passage itself has to say about the wine, we can't come to any other conclusion than to say, yes, it was real wine, and yes, Jesus drank the wine. Jewish culture had a saying, without wine, there is no joy. If it was grape juice they were drinking, they would never have that saying, okay? It was wine. Let's just let that happen. So hospitality, again, a sacred responsibility in this culture. Running out of wine would be a humiliating faux pas, and it would reflect poorly on, in fact, it wouldn't reflect poorly, it would bring disgrace upon the bride and groom. They would no longer be called king and queen or treated as such. People would leave, and I might want to have the wine run out early if I were the groom in that scenario. I would take the heat just to get rid of the people, maybe. But Mary doesn't want that to happen, so she turns to Jesus. They have no more wine, she told him. How does that concern you and me? Jesus answers. My time has not yet come. Other versions of the Bible, that's the New Living, others read, woman. Anytime I called my mother woman, things were going bad for me quickly. Didn't happen often. Woman, Jesus says, what does your concern have to do with me? So at first glance, it looks like Jesus is not respecting his mother very much, and that he's annoyed maybe a little bit with her and definitely with the situation. But he's brought extra guests, and if it wasn't his time to work a miracle, then maybe it was time for some of the guys he brought to run down to 7-Eleven and get a couple dozen gallons of Ernest and Julio, you know? We need to deal with the problem. So the reality is this. Mary knew that she could turn to Jesus in any situation. That's the truth. It's not that Jesus doesn't care about what's going on here. He does. His words to Mary reflect the reality that everything Jesus did, he did for a purpose. Everything he did was to be in line with God's purpose for his life. He didn't work miracles simply because he could. He worked miracles to reveal God to people who desperately needed him. So having said that, Psalm 37 tells us that God concerns himself with the details of our lives. And the lack of wine at a wedding was a concern of Mary's life that God concerned himself with, right? And it had just so happened that God was a guest at this wedding, which worked out well for everybody involved. And Jesus didn't want to see this newly married couple disgraced or suffer needless humiliation. And so a profound teachable moment is born here in verse 6. 6 stone water pots were standing there. They were used for Jewish ceremonial purposes and held 20 to 30 gallons each. So these water pots weren't there for any reason to do with wine. They were there for ceremonial cleansing, for the cleaning that was required for each person under Jewish law. As we saw at the dinner party that Jesus had a few weeks ago that he attended at the house of Simon the Pharisee, it was Jewish custom for those who were hosting dinner guests to provide water for those people to wash their feet, wash their bodies so that they could be ceremonially clean and ready for the dinner that they were going to have together. So Simon ignored that custom when it came to Jesus, which was a significant slap in the face. And Jesus received, as a result, a much greater honor when a woman of a certain immoral reputation jumped the fence, wept over Jesus, and wiped the mud and dirt off of his feet with her tears and her hair and her most expensive perfume. So it was religious law that people wash their hands before each meal in between each course of the meal and at the end of the meal. I wish I could get my kids to do one of those things, right? Anytime, just once, do it. If you didn't wash multiple times from the water that was in these pots, then you were considered ceremonially, religiously unclean. It was all part of the meticulous rule keeping that had to be adhered to in order to remain in good religious standing. But these pots are part of the sign that John is revealing to us. These pots represented the heavy and restrictive religious law. It was a spiritually bankrupt and oppressive religion of insiders who pushed away those people who needed God most, right? We said earlier that 7 represents perfection and completion. The fact that there were only 6 pots of water here is a sign indicating that religion leaves us significantly lacking. Jesus had come to offer unreligious, unoppressive, and love-driven access to God. He had come to offer unreligious, unoppressive, and love-driven access to God. The religion of the day was keeping people at a distance from God, and Jesus' purpose was to do away with that imperfect religion, making God accessible to anyone, especially to those who'd been left as outsiders by a religious culture. Jesus brought new joy, a refreshing hope to those who'd been laid low and tossed aside under this heavy-handed religion. So these 6 water pots each hold up to 30 gallons, and no wedding feast on earth, especially at that time, could have consumed 180 gallons of wine. There wasn't need for it. But what John's communicating here to his readers is that anytime we need Jesus, his love, his grace, and his mercy aren't just enough. They don't just barely get us by. They overwhelm us. He provides overwhelming mercy, overwhelming grace, overwhelming love, overwhelming forgiveness. Now, he doesn't always provide it the way that we expect it or sometimes demand it. He doesn't always provide it when we want it. He always doesn't provide it, as we would draw it up, but he always provides it. He never ignores us. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, he called the bridegroom over. Usually the host serves the best wine first. Then when everyone is full and doesn't care, he brings out the less expensive wines, but you've kept the best until now. So the master of ceremonies is clueless both to the need for wine and to the miracle that Jesus had performed. This guy even jokes that they held out in serving the best wine, waiting to the end when it wouldn't be appreciated as much as if they had used it at the beginning. More affirmation that, yes, it was real wine. We still serve the best first, right? If we run out, we go to the cupboard that we don't let anybody know about and grab the box that's in there that we don't let anybody know that we drink, if we do that kind of thing. We serve what's best first, and we leave whatever we have in the cupboard for last. I was at, except in Wisconsin, they just give you the worst right from the bat and keep it going. I was at a wedding there, so I know this. My brother-in-law's wedding, 15 years ago, 17 years. I don't know how long they've been married. I just need to know how long I've been married. So we go there, and my father-in-law and I are hanging out, and he's a dairy farmer from Wisconsin. I'm a city kid from Chicago, so we have a ton in common. And he says, "Hey, let me buy you a drink." And I say, "No, I'll buy you one." "No, I'll buy you one." And we went back and forth, and finally he didn't really want to buy it anyway. So he said, "Yeah, okay, you buy it." So we go to the bartender, and I'm like, "I'm gonna get him a nice Merlot. Maybe they've got something from the West Coast. Maybe they got something from Woodinville. So a little Chateau Saint Michel, something like that." So I say, "What's your best Merlot?" And the guy looks at me, and this is what he says: "I got wine in a box and Bud Light. What do you want?" And I'm thinking, I said to my father-in-law, "You get the next one. I got this." It's not going to cost me much at all. So we got wine in a box and Bud Light. What do you want? You snob from wherever you are. I think I thought I was from California, which that's cool. So the spiritual translation is this, not of the Wisconsin story. There is no spiritual translation, but the spiritual translation of Jesus' story here in John 2 is that the law is bitter and sour. Religion is bitter and sour, not unlike wine in a box, right? But in comparison to what religion offers, what Jesus offers is rich and sweet It's the rich and sweet taste of love and grace and mercy and forgiveness and purpose. It's new wine. It's new wine. So this, verse 11, this miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was Jesus' first display of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So another deeper truth in this sign is that we can turn to Jesus no matter what our circumstances may be, no matter who we are. And Mary does just that. She turns to Jesus instinctively when she had a problem. And I wonder, I've been asking myself, is that what I do? And not as often as I'd like. The answer is often no. What about you? Is that what we do? Do we instinctively turn to Jesus when we're up against it in life? Do we instinctively turn to Jesus when the waves are crashing hard around us? Do we instinctively turn to Jesus, or do we take on the circumstances of our life under our own power and try to figure it out on our own? And we end up more stressed out, more worried, more problems to solve than we started with oftentimes. Psalm 37, verse 23 and 24, the steps of the godly are directed by the Lord. So the godly means not the super spiritual. The godly means you. The godly means followers of Jesus. The steps of the godly are directed by the Lord. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, and man, we stumble, and we stumble, and we stumble. Though they stumble, they will not fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. I love those passages, that passage. We talked a lot lately about living in intimate proximity to Jesus. When we know Jesus intimately, we will trust him, and we will instinctively turn to him instead of taking on our issues and our stuff under our own power. The sad reality, though, is that very relatively few people, including Christians, relatively few have experienced Jesus up close and personal, to have that level of intimacy with him, to turn to him instinctively. Even fewer, even those who have experienced that have found it difficult to sustain over a period of time. And this means that too few of us in the room really know what it's like to experience the overwhelming love, the overwhelming grace that he lavishes on those who trust him and allow themselves to be captured by his relentless pursuit. Have we allowed ourselves to be captured by his relentless pursuit? Are we in need, as we sit here, of allowing him to capture us with his relentless pursuit? What's the state of your relationship with Jesus? What's the state of my relationship with Jesus as we sit here or stand here this morning? We don't have to be ceremonially clean. We don't have to obsess over rituals and rules. We literally don't have to clean our behavior up in order to gain God's favor. Jesus offers us, as we are, this new wine, his presence when we need it. He offers us the very best he has to give. He offers you and I all that he is in this moment, and he offers it without hesitation or without any reservation whatsoever. There's not one of us in here that doesn't need that from Jesus right now. Maybe that's where we can admit we are. At some level, we're all there, but maybe we can admit that that's where we are. That what we need more than anything is to satisfy the longing of our soul by being in intimate proximity to Jesus, by allowing his overwhelming love, his overwhelming grace, not to provide just the bare minimum in our life, but to blow us away with the depth of his love for us. If we allow ourselves to be captivated and captured by his love, his posture towards us is not this: all right, you can have me now that you turned my way. If you do this, if you do that, read your Bible this many days, then I'll open my arms towards you. Go to church this many days. Tell this many people about me. And then, okay, I got you. No, his posture towards us right now, regardless of what we've done, regardless of what we've not done, is open arms and full embrace. We said at the beginning that each sign has both a practical element and a deeper spiritual truth. The practical element here is that Jesus provided wine at the 7-day wedding feast for a couple of newlyweds. The deeper spiritual truth is that we can turn to Jesus in any circumstance and experience overwhelming love. Maybe not as fast as we want it, maybe not the way that we want it, but we will experience it. So there are times when we find that certain areas of our relationship with Jesus are emptied or depleted. That doesn't make sense. There are certain times when we find that our relationship, certain areas kind of says that we can compartmentalize our relationship with Jesus, and we can't. But there are certain times when our relationship with Jesus feels empty, hollow, lacking, and altogether depleted. And I wonder if that's what you're feeling as you sit here today, that your relationship with Jesus has been depleted, that it's hollow, that it's empty, that it's lacking. If that's the case, you need only allow yourself to be captured by Jesus. And I said last week, I think when we get together on Sunday morning, the one thing that I believe is true is two things I believe are true. One is that God has something significant for us as a body that he wants to reveal to us and he wants to share with us. And I don't know what that is any given week. I don't have the answer to that. I also believe, maybe more importantly, that he has something to reveal, to say, a way to redirect each of our lives, something that's unique to us, something that God has uniquely for us. And maybe what he has uniquely for us today is to allow ourselves to be captured by his relentless pursuit. Even if we didn't think we needed that, maybe consider how much you really do. I want to close with a passage from Isaiah 55. And every time I read this passage, I find that I need it. And that's totally true today. Is anyone thirsty? Come and drink. Even if you have no money, come take your choice of wine or milk. It's all free. Why spend your money on food that does not give you strength? Why pay for food that does you no good? Listen, and I will tell you where to get food that is good for the soul. Come to me with your ears wide open. Listen, for the life of your soul is at stake. I'm ready to make an everlasting covenant with you. I will give you all the mercies and unfailing love that I promised to David. I, the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, have made you glorious. Glorious. Father, as we consider these words, as we consider your first miracle, your first sign, turning water into wine for a couple of kids in Cana, may we know a couple things. May we leave here knowing them in a fresh way, in a deeper way than we did when we came in. May we know that you pursue us and you never stop. Even when we run in the opposite direction, you never stop pursuing us. Even when it feels like we're too far away from you, that we've screwed it up too much to turn to you. And that's why so many of us don't, because we feel like somebody else can, but not me, because I'm too far gone. May we know that's a lie. And may we know that's a lie that comes from the pit of hell itself. And may we begin to turn to you, allow ourselves to be captured by you. May we begin to live in intimate proximity to you once again. And as we consider the invitation of this passage in Isaiah, is anyone thirsty? God, we are desperately thirsty. Why do we pay for food that does us no good? Why do we spend our money on food that gives us no strength? It's because we're trying to soothe the ache, fill the emptiness. And you're the only one that can do that, God. And may you do that in our lives. And if we're in here this morning and we're considering, we're thinking about a relationship with you, don't let us walk out the door without, and just move on into our week without considering how desperately we know in this moment we need you. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.